All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's parenting webinar series. This week we have Leah, who is going to talk to us about effective bedtime routine. So Leah, she's a third-year school psychology student, and she's obviously one of the counselors at the Haven. And her clinical interests center around implementing cognitive behavior intervention to ensure clients with a broad range of disorders receiving the highest standard of evidence-based care. Leah has been working at the Haven as an extern this year and will be moving on to cognitive and behavior consultants of Westchester and Manhattan next year, where she will be implementing CBT and DBT interventions. Leah is also very passionate about providing services to diverse, underserved populations while constantly working to dismantle the systemic inequities that disproportionately impact this population. So Leah, we're lucky to have you. Please go ahead and start your presentation.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Wayne. Thank you for everyone for being here. So tonight we're going to talk about building an effective bedtime routine, which is a topic that impacts kids from a wide range of ages. And so hopefully everyone can find something to relate to in here. Mm-hmm. And we'll kind of talk about how it can look differently across the age span. Mm-hmm. So just a little overview of what we'll talk about tonight. We're going to start off with why is sleep important in the first place, and why is it this thing that so many people find to be difficult and struggle with, and then tips on sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene is ways to really foster that effective bedtime routine. And then we'll get into the bedtime routine in general and what should that actually look like, and what are some tips to help ensure that we're enforcing consistency and things that will get children and adolescents to kind of sleep through the night. And then we'll end off with any questions and a conversation about anything that we talked about. All right. So to start off, I kind of put this chart in here to tell us how much sleep should we actually be getting. So as you can see, through the age years, the hours that we need kind of range. And as children progress from young children to adolescence, the amount of sleep that is recommended and that you do need does become less. However, kind of being in the high school and talking to kids, it does seem like that 8 to 10 is not being met by a large portion of the population of students. So typically, I think what students come in and tell us is about 6 or 7 max. But really, it is recommended that through that high school age of 18, kids still are getting that 8 to 10 as the ideal of what would be best for them. And then those elementary children, really getting in a lot of sleep is important for their development. So now we're going to talk about why sleep is actually important. So the importance of sleep for children and adolescents. So sleep is one of those things that's as essential to people's health as nutrition, movement, these big facets of life that promote healthy development and increased academics, increased social emotional functioning. Sleep is really up there as one of those big 3 things that we should be focusing about in a child's development. And there's a lot of detriments that can come with a lack of sleep or a poor sleep schedule. It can affect children's moods, their ability to maintain and develop friendships, their mental health, as well as their physical health. So sleep really runs the gamut of all these different facets of children's lives, and its effects can run very deep. Sleep also affects both short-term as well as long-term health. Short-term, it can affect the body's ability to fight off disease. Sleep is that time where your body's supposed to be restored and your immune system is able to do what it does best. And when that's not happening, it can increase the likelihood of getting sick. So, if a child is frequently getting sick, that can have some long-term health effects that are tied back to sleep.
Right.
And then that lack of sleep leads to an increased probability of developing an anxiety disorder. Your body's not getting the chance to fully shut down and relax. And a lot of times when children are up at night and having difficulty sleeping, they're thinking about the things that have happened to them during the day. They're thinking about maybe environmental influences that cause them a bit of stress. And those thoughts don't get time to rest. So they're active during the day, and then they're also active at night, which can lead to development of that anxiety disorder. And then increased likelihood of getting sick, like we said before, as well as an increased frequency of sickness. So especially during those winter months, if children aren't sleeping, they might be getting colds every week and their body might just feel worn down and tired. So instead of focusing only on the negative, we can also talk about what positive benefits come from sleep. So sleep does lead to better attention, better school performance, better ability to regulate emotions, and then impulse control. So when you get that rest, your mind is able to slow down and think about the choices you make before you make them. Think about what you need to do to get yourself in the best possible emotional state to go throughout your day.
Mhm.
Think about, how to best pay attention in school, how to implement the best, I'm blanking on a word right now, the best organizational strategies to focus and pay attention. All those things can be tied back to sleep. So overall, it's just very important for children and adolescents to be getting that sleep every night. So now we can transition to talking a bit about sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene refers to consistent practices that you go through in order to maintain that sleep schedule. So it's things that you want to do all the time, every night, to really ensure that your body's getting the rest it needs. And this is all about routine. Routine is the most important takeaway from this presentation. Having a consistent routine is necessary to promote good sleep hygiene. And that routine, there's some things that should go into it that we'll talk about. So you want to develop a routine that has a predictable beginning, middle, and end, that a child can anticipate the same things each night. There's no surprises, no things coming in that don't happen all the time, so that by the time you get to that end point, they feel ready to sleep. So examples of kind of having this routine, and we'll go into this more in later slides, but just some things that to keep in mind could be saying a good night phrase every night. So maybe there's one word you say that triggers the routine, whether that's it's bedtime or like let's get ready for bed. Or for those younger children, maybe singing the same song every night before lights out to really signify that it's time for rest. And this song forms an association with the brain of you hear this, now it's time for sleep. Some more examples and recommendations would be having visual reminders of that routine. So that could be listing out, maybe having it on your child's bedroom wall or in the bathroom, those things that we're going to go through to get ready for bed. So put on the pajamas, check. Brush the teeth, check. Maybe read a story, read a book, check. And have that visual reminder of everything that they've done in the routine, how far they are from getting to that end point, and then finally ending with a night's sleep. And there can also be verbal reminders. So I know a lot of children are resistant to go to sleep at night. So that can be things like giving 5-minute warnings. Okay, you can have 5 more minutes of whatever activity you're doing, of playing, of coloring, of whatever that might be. And then we start the bedtime routine, kind of giving check marks of, okay, you've brushed your teeth for 1 minute, you have 1 more to go. So kind of having that verbal encouragement throughout the process. Another tip for sleep hygiene is to go to bed and wake up at the same time each day. And I think it's important to preface this point of the conversation with the fact that, of course, everything we're talking about is the ideal, right? So when we say the same time each day, of course, there are going to be things that come up. There's going to be special events, weekend things where maybe a child is staying out a bit later. But I think as consistent as it can be, especially throughout that school week when children have a lot of responsibilities, this would be what we aim for. But it's not a big deal if it, doesn't happen every single night. Of course, we're all human and it can't always be perfect. So I think that's important to say.
Right.
But with going to bed and waking up at the same time, this helps set and establish a circadian rhythm. So what that is kind of your body's biological clock that signifies when it's time to wake up, when it's time to go to sleep, when you start getting tired. And it runs in a 24-hour cycle. So if you ever notice maybe every day around maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, you start feeling tired, it's kind of that afternoon slump. That's a part of your circadian rhythm. And you're going to notice that happening at the same time every day. So having a circadian rhythm and having that consistency makes it easier for children to fall asleep quickly. Circadian rhythms control our sleep cycle by sending little signals out to the brain that tell kids when they're either tired or when they're energized. So if a kid is kind of running around being really hyper right before bed, their brain's going to send them a signal that says, I'm energized, it's not time to sleep. And then even if they're not doing that same energized hyper action the next night, their brain's going to remember that that time is associated with being awake and being stimulated. And that's going to throw off their circadian rhythm. However, new circadian rhythms can be established with that consistency. So for example, if a child consistently goes to sleep following those routines at 9 o'clock every night for a whole week, around 8:30 p.m. or so, the brain will start sending them signals that they're tired. So really like producing that melatonin that's going to shut the brain down, slow everything down around 8:30, so that by the time they get to 9 o'clock, their body's prepared for sleep and ready to get a good night's rest. Our next tip is a big one, and this one is just getting more and more difficult as screens become more prominent in children and adolescents' lives. But it's extremely important to avoid screens as much as possible before bed. So exposure to bright screens reduces the body's ability to produce melatonin, which is that hormone, that signal that controls sleep. So that's what's sent, like, in that example with the circadian rhythm around 8:30, melatonin is sent out, and that's what gets the body ready for sleep. Bright screens is something that's going to prevent that from being sent out. So in an ideal world, our electronic use should stop about 1 hour before bedtime. And that's, can be a bit different with children versus adults, but for children, it really does reduce that melatonin. So you want to make it as close to that hour as possible where they're not on their screens, they're not on their iPads, they're not watching TV, they're doing an alternate activity that's helping them wind down. And of course, this requires a lot of organization during the daytime hours to ensure that, everything's on screens these days, homework wise. So ensure that homework is done before bed. So while we want our nighttime routines to be consistent, it's also important that the daytime routines are consistent as well. Children who use electronics at night do not receive that high quality sleep. So they might not be getting into their full sleep cycle. And then they're more likely to feel tired the next day. And I know electronics are such a big part of kids' lives these days. Kids are on social media, and that's how they kind of find their entertainment on things like TikTok and YouTube. And it can be really effective to start setting some limits on these social media apps. I know TikTok has a feature that I've talked about with a couple of high schoolers where you can set a limit of maybe you get 30 minutes a day to watch TikToks, and that's reasonable. And then after that, the app actually doesn't let you watch any more videos. So doing things like that can promote the use of alternative areas of entertainment that kids can do to kind of get them that same rush that they're seeking, but not disrupt their sleep cycle.
Mhm.
And then finding that tech-free way to wind down. So whether that's reading a chapter of a book, whether that's, sitting and talking with family or siblings, whether that's coloring, drawing, doing something artistic, something with music, those kind of things that are going to relax the body, relax the brain, and lead to a smooth transition into the bedtime evening routine. Our next thing is using the bed for sleep only. And this is another big one that we don't always think about. So a lot of times, people can associate their bed with not only sleeping, but also playtime during play dates. A lot of adolescents will lay in bed and do their homework, kind of hanging out, watching TV. All of that can confuse the brain on what is the real purpose of the child's bed. So the brain, if all these things are done in bed, the brain will form these associations between the bed and being awake and stimulated, rather than thinking of their bed as a place to rest, to recover, to have a good night's sleep. And those things, so if a child is in the bed throughout their whole afternoon, and with the high schoolers and adolescents, a lot of times, if they're doing homework in their bed, because, you do sleep in your bed, so your brain already has that predisposition of the bed being a place to sleep. So maybe they're doing homework in their bed, they fall asleep while they do their homework because their body's, in the bed, their brain's getting ready for sleep, which is a problem with a lot of high school students. And then the more kind of fun activities that are done in the bed, it can be harder to fall asleep. So once it's time to get into bed, it's time to go to sleep, dimming the lights a bit, if that's an option for you, about 15 or 20 minutes before bedtime, upon getting into bed, can signify again to the brain that it's time for sleep, play is over, and now it's time to rest. And then the last tip that we have for sleep hygiene is honoring your child's senses. So sleep can be an overwhelming thing for a lot of kids, especially if it's something that's difficult for them and they have trouble with. It can cause a lot of anxiety. And it's important to acknowledge that these kids are getting body signals that tell them that sleep is kind of scary or uneasy. So we want to do whatever we can to alleviate some of that, while still keeping firm with that sleep routine and finding ways to make children more comfortable. So some ideas here are using music, some light, calm music. A lot of kids react really well to white noise in the bedroom if they're, that can kind of make it difficult for those thoughts to punch through. The white noise is kind of calming for the brain. And then using things like more physical senses. So things like weighted blanket that kind of tells the body that it's protected and it's safe. Giving a light massage before bed, rubbing a kid's shoulders or back to give that physical touch. We're having some sort of soothing alarm clock. So that ties into hearing, ties into vision. Some alarm clocks these days have like some light that they project throughout the room. Night lights are another good one, things like that. So really acknowledging that sometimes going to sleep is something that's scary or uneasy, and doing things to be able to address that. So now we're going to discuss a little bit about what are the parents' role in the bedtime routine. So within all of this, it can be hard to implement these things. Kids can be stubborn, kids can be resistant, and it's important to really establish boundaries when it comes to forming a bedtime routine. So reframing sleep struggles. So it's important to understand that your kid is not just giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And of course, it's extremely valid to be frustrated when maybe a kid is very resistant to go to sleep and that's, of course, it's frustrating, but kind of changing the way that we think about that can be helpful for parents to understand where their kids are coming from a bit better. So they're having a hard time, and that's what's causing the behavior of being resistant to going to sleep. So the parent's role in this is enforcing things like that routine, timing, and structure. So ensuring that the child knows this isn't negotiable. This is what you kind of have to do at this time. And you can do it in a very caring and nurturing way, but really establishing that role as keeping track of those things. And then also encouraging your child and getting into the child's role to express their feelings about. So might be like an instinct to kind of maybe yell at your child, or kind of just shove them into the bathroom and be like, brush your teeth, by kind of encouraging your child to express maybe why they're being so resistant, or what's going on in their head. What are you thinking about? What are you feeling? What's going on in your body right now? Why are you showing this behavior? It can help kind of facilitate a more calm and communicative understanding, where maybe it's something small that the child just wants a nightlight, and that's kind of what was underlying that behavior. So encouraging children to really express those feelings can help understand really what's going on there. And then finally, validating your child's feelings and trusting in their ability to cope and tolerate distress. So it can also be an instinct, if your child is crying or comes into your room, says they had a nightmare, to want to nurture them and to want to immediately try and jump in and help. And kids are very resilient, and they are able to cope with a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress, and a lot of maybe uncomfortable feelings. And, not always offering that solution right away, but being able to encourage and validate those feelings that they're experiencing, and knowing that this is something that they are capable of doing. All kids are capable of sleeping and sleeping through the night, and each kid is unique and might do it in a different way, but trusting in their ability to do so is a huge, important part.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right, I think that wraps up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That wraps up the presentation.